Have you ever wondered if the language you speak influences the way that you think? Well, the Sapir-Whorf Hypothesis states that there are certain thoughts of an individual in one language that cannot be understood by someone who lives in another language. This hypothesis, created by Benjamin Whorf and Edward Sapir, became popular in the 1950s. Noam Chomsky attacked their hypothesis until people began to believe that language only had a small effect on thought. Even though the hypothesis was criticized and became less important after that, Sapir and Whorf put a lot of thought into their work, so let's take a look at the thought process a little bit deeper. Sapir and Whorf broke down the hypothesis into more simple concepts. One concept was linguistic relativity. Linguistic relativity states that the structural differences between languages are paralleled by non-linguistic cognitive differences. Kay and Kempton from the Semantic Scholar used to help us better understand linguistic relativity was how the number and the type of basic color words of a language can help us to determine how we see the rainbow. Another concept Sapir and Whorf came up with was linguistic determinism. Linguistic determinism states that the structure of language can strongly influence or determine somebody's worldview. Worldview is the consistent and integral sense of existence that provides a theoretical framework for generating, sustaining, and applying knowledge. An example of linguistic determinism is how the Inuit can think more intelligently about snow than some of the other languages because they have more words to distinguish forms of snow. There are also two kinds of linguistic determinism. There's weak determinism, which states that language does not define one's views of the world, and strong determinism states that view is strictly defined by someone's view of the world. According to the article written by Bodeshi, Peterson and Siegel created an experiment to prove linguistic determinism. Peterson and Siegel had deaf children view a doll placing a marble inside of a box. They then had the doll leave and took the marble out of the box and placed it inside of a basket. They then asked the deaf children where they thought the doll would look for the marble once she returned, and the deaf children with parents who were also deaf were able to tell that the doll would probably look where she had last put the marble. However, the deaf children without deaf parents who had not grown up in a stable linguistic environment mostly got the answer wrong and could not see the relationship. There are also 4 forms of empirical evidence that support the hypothesis. The first is dominant distinctions in people's lexicons, meaning the evolution of language leads to optimal adjustments of behavior to external conditions. The second shows that behavior affects linguistic differences and that people primarily rely on languages that are typical to them. The third form is basic grammatical structure. As grammatical structures are different, people have to see reality through a given system of grammar tools. Lastly, the impact of grammatical structure on behavior. This shows how the structure of languages affects people's actions, strategies, and choices. Now that we have looked at the background and evidence to the hypothesis, let's look at how it can benefit society. According to the Sociology Guide, the theory proved that with language we do not only express thoughts and perceptions, but it also can shape the way that we think. Therefore, the hypothesis allows us to have a better understanding of how we distinguish between the past, present, and future. The Sapir-Whorf Hypothesis also showed us how language reflects and shapes our cultural experiences. Scientists better understand these concepts and can use them to better society. For example, now that we know deaf children perceive reality better when their parents also are deaf and know sign language, we can inform the parents of deaf children and they will feel more compelled to learn it. In conclusion, we can now see how the structure of language strongly influences people's behaviors. As Richard Sapir once said himself, time has a wonderful way of weeding out the trivial.